The night her life got stolen, Ilara Vale realized scent could fail. Not in the laboratory, not on blotting paper, not in the sealed neck of a bottle where truth kept still long enough to be studied. On people. Backstage at New York Fashion Week, with heat rolling off industrial lights and steam hissing from garment irons, she stood behind a black curtain and watched her own formula enter the world under someone else's name. If you like stories that begin with betrayal and get darker from there, subscribe now, because this one doesn't stop at theft. A host in a silver gown smiled into a bank of microphones. Cameras burst white across the runway entrance. Beyond the curtain, editors leaned forward, buyers lifted phones, and the first row arranged itself into the kind of attention people confused with reverence. Beside the host stood Adrian Cross in a charcoal suit that fit too well and said too little. At his side, one manicured hand looped through his elbow. Celeste Cole wore black satin and victory. Elixir Noir, the host announced. Celeste raised her wrist. The fragrance reached Ilara before the applause did. She did not need the atomized mist. She did not need the lacquered bottle glinting under the runway lamps. One breath told her everything. Calabrian bergamot lifted first, sharp and bright, then black currant with the dark sweetness dialed almost to excess. Rose Absolute opened in the heart, but not enough to soften the jasmine sambic riding beneath it. Orris, sandalwood, amber resin in the base, warmed just enough to turn velvet on skin. Her proportions, her balance, her mistake on the first jasmine draft corrected the exact way she had corrected it 3 months earlier. Alone, at 2:17 in the morning, after wiping blood from a cut on her thumb with the back of her wrist. She knew where every note came from because she had built the thing, molecule by molecule. Adrian bent toward a microphone and said, "This scent was born from years of shared experimentation." Shared. The room rewarded him with delighted laughter, then clapping, then the hungry noise of people deciding a story before asking whether it was true. Ilara's fingers tightened on the velvet curtain until the pile crushed flat beneath her nails. The beadwork on a passing gown brushed her bare arm. Someone shouted for a makeup sponge. Someone else swore about a hem. A stylist rushed by, carrying 3 pairs of heels in one hand like dead birds. Everything backstage kept moving, because the machine never stopped for the person caught under it. Celeste smiled for the cameras like she had carried the formula in her body. Adrian turned toward her at exactly the right angle and placed a hand at the small of her back. He had always known where to stand. A month ago, he had stood in Ilara's apartment kitchen in shirt sleeves, tasting tomato sauce from the wooden spoon and telling her nobody understood her work the way he did. A week after that, he had pressed a kiss to her temple and said patents could wait until after the launch because speed mattered more than paperwork. 48 hours before the show, he had watched her revise the final concentration in silence, then told her to get some sleep because he would protect what they had built. Now he stood under a wall of flash photography and sold her life back to the room as if she had never touched it. The first tear surprised her, not because she felt it, because she smelled it. Celine changed the air close to her skin. Stress pushed metallic sharpness through the fine warmth at the base of her throat. Her own body, honest as ever, announcing what the rest of her was trying to lock down. She let go of the curtain and turned away before the second tear could fall. Concrete corridor, exposed pipes, black cases stacked against the wall. The backstage glamour dropped off in 6 steps and left bare utility underneath. Her heels struck hard on the floor as she moved deeper into the service passage. One hand at her mouth, the other braced on the cinder block wall when the hallway bent. She needed air, not a speech, not a confrontation she hadn't prepared. Air. Instead, she caught a scent that stopped her cold. Not perfume. Presence. Vetiver first, but darker than the polished green version sold in luxury counters. This was root and earth and old smoke. Bergamot sat high in it, restrained, as if someone had taught brightness discipline. Beneath that, cedar warmed by skin. Not cologne heavy, not broadcast. Something close to the body, expensive only because it did not need to announce itself. And under all of it, nothing. Ilara's head lifted. She stood very still. Every person leaked. Fear carried metal. Attraction changed salt and heat. Guilt had its own sour hesitation, tiny but readable. A chemical flinch the body released before the face betrayed anything. Lies never smelled the same twice, but they always arrived with movement. Cortisol nudging sweat, breath changing rhythm, skin giving itself away. She had built a career, and then a reputation, and then a small mythology around the fact that she could smell what people tried to hide. Investors called it intuition because they preferred a glamorous word. Editors called it genius because they could print that. Adrian used to call it witchcraft when he wanted her amused enough to forgive him something. But the truth was simpler. People told on themselves. Everyone except the man standing at the far end of the corridor. He stepped out of the shadow between two garment racks with unhurried precision, as if he had been there long enough to belong to the building. Tall enough that the low industrial light caught first at the line of his shoulders, then at the angle of his jaw. Black suit, open collar, dark hair pushed back from his forehead, one hand at his side, the other in his pocket. He stopped 3 feet away. From this distance she saw the scar. It ran from beneath the edge of his collar, climbed the side of his neck, and disappeared under his jaw in a pale, tightened seam the color of old ivory. Not decorative, not theatrical. The kind of damage that had happened fast and healed slowly. His eyes found her. Blue-green, but not soft. Winter water under cloud. From the runway entrance behind them, applause broke again. Celeste must have lifted the bottle for a second round of photographs. Somebody shouted Adrian's name. The hall swallowed it. The stranger glanced toward the noise, then back to Ilara. "Your heart's on fire," he said. His voice was low, roughened at the edges, as if it had crossed smoke once and never fully recovered. Ilara wiped beneath one eye with the heel of her hand. "Did you come here to be poetic or cruel?" "Neither." "Then what?" "To see whether you were finished." She stared at him. He held her gaze without the twitch people usually developed under scrutiny. No glance away, no performative sympathy, no oily opportunism. She knew the species of men who haunted backstage corridors after public disasters, eager to purchase talent cheap while the blood was still warm. He did not smell like appetite. He did not smell like anything she could name. "That depends," she said. "Finished with what?" "With grieving the version of yourself that still believed they needed your permission." The line should have irritated her. It should have sounded rehearsed, the kind of dark, tailored sentence rich men saved for vulnerable women because they thought it made control look like insight. Instead, it landed clean. He drew a card from inside his jacket and held it between 2 fingers. Heavy cream stock. No logo on the side facing her. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't know you." "No, you seem comfortable with that." "I know enough." Something cold moved under her ribs. "Enough about what?" "You built the scent." His eyes flicked once toward the runway entrance. "They stole it badly. If she had your nose, she would have softened the black currant by half a drop." Ilara froze. Only 3 people knew she had nearly overweighted that top accord before correcting it. Herself, Adrian, and the assistant who had spilled ethanol on the sample cart and gotten fired 6 weeks ago. The man extended the cart another inch. "Do you want revenge?" he asked quietly. "Or do you want to become untouchable?" The corridor suddenly felt narrower. She took the card. The paper was warm from his hand. When she turned it over, she found an address in Grasse, southern France. Beneath it, written in dark ink with hard, decisive slant, 1 week. Bring your gift. She lifted her head. "Who are you?" His mouth shifted, not quite into a smile. The wrong question. Then he stepped back, turned once, and was gone down the intersecting corridor with the same measured pace he had arrived with, leaving only that impossible absence where his emotions should have been. Ilara stood listening to the applause bleed through concrete. Then she tucked the card into her palm and walked back toward the sound. The VIP lounge looked like a victory had been staged there professionally. White leather sectional, buckets of champagne sweating into silver tubs. 2 publicists bent over phones, already shaping headlines. A wall screen looped the runway reveal in silent replay. Celeste sat with one ankle crossed over the other, still in satin, now holding a coupe glass she had not touched. Adrian stood near the bar with his tie loosened exactly enough to imply he had worked for this. When Ilara entered, neither of them looked surprised. That hurt more than panic would have. Adrian turned first, saw her face, and dismissed the publicists with a quick motion of 2 fingers. Celeste did not rise. "Ilara," Adrian said, "you shouldn't be in here right now." She stopped 6 feet away. "Congratulations." Celeste's mouth curved. "Thank you." Ilara looked at Adrian. "I meant on the theft." The room went still. Not empty. Still. The way a room goes still when everyone inside suddenly believes silence might be more useful than language. Adrian set down his glass. "Don't do this in front of staff. Then tell them to leave." "They're already leaving," Celeste said. The publicists did not need to be told twice. They moved with quick professionalism, eyes carefully elsewhere. One of them shut the door behind herself. Now there were 3. Ilara took another step. Every note in that formula is mine. Adrian exhaled through his nose. It was developed under my studio. It was developed by me. It was refined by both of us. You watched me work. His face hardened almost imperceptibly. I funded you. Celeste rose then, smoothing one hand over the line of her dress. She was taller than Alara by an inch in flats and by several in heels, with the kind of composed beauty that had likely never been mistaken for softness. You were hired to assist, Celeste said. You were paid. Alara laughed once without humor. I was used. That, Celeste replied, depends on your understanding of the arrangement. Adrian moved closer, voice lowering, trying for calm. This is exactly why I asked you not to come tonight. You're upset. I'm clear. You're emotional. There it was. The old trick. Shrink her size. Sand down the certainty. Reframe theft as overreaction and call it maturity. Alara's body ran its own inventory. She tasted bitterness high in the back of her throat, felt the pulse beating under the skin at her wrist, smelled Adrian at close range, cedar cologne, mint gum, starch, and the blank expensive cleanliness he used when he wanted to pass for disciplined. She searched beneath it for guilt and found only self-justification, dry and settled, like dust in old books. A man could become honest with himself about his own theft and produce almost nothing she could use. That realization landed with humiliating force. You told me we'd file after the launch, she said. Adrian's jaw shifted. Because I was trying to avoid this exact complication. No, she said. You were buying time. Celeste folded her arms. Do you have documents? Alara looked at her. Patents, Celeste said. Contracts, draft registration, anything that legally establishes sole authorship. The pause answered for her. Adrian had insisted the formula remain in studio files. Adrian had insisted speed mattered more than paperwork. Adrian had told her not to insult him by acting like he might ever turn on her. Celeste saw it. That was the ugliest part. The little flash of confirmation in her eyes. Not surprise. Inventory. She had checked the weakness and found it real. I thought so, Celeste said. Adrian softened his tone as if generosity could now be performed safely. You're gifted, Alara. Nobody's denying that. You are standing inside the denial. I'm standing inside reality. He moved closer still, lowering his voice to the register he used in private when he wanted intimacy to do the work coercion couldn't. You had access because of me. Materials because of me. Introductions because of me. You think talent builds a house on its own? It doesn't. It needs infrastructure. Alara stared at him. 4 years. 4 years of late nights, burns on her wrists from overheated glass, subway rides home at dawn, missed funerals, skipped holidays, meals eaten cold beside drying racks of test strips, and his answer was infrastructure. Celeste reached for her glass, finally took a sip, then said, Take the lesson and move on. Alara looked at her. What lesson? That brilliance without ownership is volunteering. The line struck because it was true and cruel in equal measure. Alara inhaled once, deeply, because if she did not, she might reach for the champagne bottle and put it through the television. Instead, she said very evenly, Keep the launch. Keep the bottle. Keep the headlines. One day people will know what your house smells like. Adrian frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means theft changes the hand that holds it. Celeste laughed softly. That sounded better in your head. Maybe it had. Maybe not. Alara no longer cared. She turned and left with Adrian calling her name once, sharply, as if he still believed the right tone could stop her. It could not. Outside, the city had gone wet and metallic. Rain slicked the curbs black and turned every taxi light into a smear. Alara kept walking until the tents, the handlers, the press barricades, and the whole feverish machine of Fashion Week fell behind her. Only when she reached her apartment did she look at the card again. Grass. 1 week. Bring your gift. She set it on the kitchen table and stared at it while the radiator hissed under the window and the ancient refrigerator clicked in and out like a bad heart. By morning, she had decided the man was dangerous. By evening, she had decided danger was still a better offer than humiliation. By the end of the week, she had no work. It happened cleanly. First 2 meetings canceled with vague apologies. Then 1 lab stopped returning emails. Then a boutique house in Soho, where she had consulted twice before, sent a message so brief it was almost elegant. We're pursuing other directions at this time. Adrian did not need to call in favors personally. Celeste's father owned enough floors, enough brands, enough small frightened people to close doors without ever touching a knob. The city changed smell around her. Not literally. Practically. Opportunity had one scent when people thought you were ascending, and another when they had been instructed to treat you like residue. At the end of 4 weeks, Alara sat cross-legged on her apartment floor with envelopes spread around her and counted the cash in her wallet twice because the first number had offended her. $212. Rent due in 6 days. The radiator banged once. A neighbor laughed through the wall. Somewhere below, a delivery scooter screamed up the block, brakes shrieking at the corner. Her studio shelf still held 15 trial accords in amber vials, each one more honest than the people who had profited from them. She picked up the card. The ink on the handwritten line had softened slightly where her thumb had traced it too often. This is insane, she thought. Then, because she trusted precision more than thought, she made coffee, showered, sat at the table, and called the number. It rang 3 times. No greeting, no assistant. Only silence with breath somewhere inside it. Slow, present. Alara held the phone tighter. This is Alara Vale. Nothing. Her pulse climbed. I'm calling about your offer. Still nothing, but she knew he was there. The line had that quality of listening that made speech feel chosen rather than automatic. She forced herself not to fill the silence with explanation. I accept. 3 heartbeats. Then the line went dead. She stared at the screen. A second later, her phone vibrated. Flight confirmation. First class, JFK to Marseille, departing the next morning. Then another message, from an unlisted number. A car will collect you at 5. Bring nothing you can't leave behind. That line should have sent her running. Instead, she looked around the apartment and realized with a kind of exhausted clarity how little in the room felt irreplaceable. The mirror over the sink was cracked at one corner. The plant on the sill had long ago surrendered the will to recover. The coat hooks near the door held a trench coat, a canvas tote, and a scarf Adrian had once told her made her look literary. She left the scarf where it was. At 4:45 the next morning, she locked the apartment with 1 suitcase and the card in her coat pocket. At 5, a black sedan idled at the curb. The driver did not ask her name. He opened the rear door, took her suitcase, and closed the trunk with the soft certainty of someone who had already been told who mattered. New York before sunrise smelled like wet concrete, diesel, bakery exhaust, and garbage trucks. Alara pressed her forehead briefly to the cool glass and watched the city thin itself into bridges and highway lights. Only when the plane leveled out above the Atlantic did the full shape of what she had done arrive. She was flying to southern France to work for a man she had met once in a service corridor after being robbed publicly by the man she had trusted privately. Reasonable women did not make decisions like this. Then again, reasonable women were not usually left with $212, a destroyed reputation, and a gift nobody around them knew how to value unless it came packaged by a man in a tailored suit. So she slept. When she woke, lavender waited. Not the timid, decorative kind twisted into hotel soaps. Miles of it. Violet blue rose combing the land in measured lines beneath a pale sky. The color so saturated it looked arranged rather than grown. Even before the car door opened in Marseille, she could smell it drifting under the hotter notes of asphalt and engine heat. By the time the sedan climbed away from the road into the hills, the lavender had become an atmosphere. Cypress trees lined the long gravel approach to the estate. The house appeared slowly between them, stone and slate, old enough to have outlived multiple generations of decent intentions. Ivy climbed one wall. Tall shutters flanked the windows. Nothing about it begged to be admired. It stood there with the confidence of something that had never needed strangers. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman in her 60s stepped onto the threshold wearing a dark dress, practical shoes, and an apron dusted faintly with flour. Silver hair coiled at the back of her head, alert eyes, a face lined not by softness, but by use. Mademoiselle Vale, she said in lightly accented English. Welcome. I am Mireille. Alara. Mireille inclined her head, accepting the correction without warmth or resistance. Of course. Come in. You must be tired. The entry hall was cool despite the afternoon outside. Beeswax, linen, old wood, stone that had held summer heat for centuries and knew how to release it slowly. Beneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, that same restrained scent she remembered from Backstage. Smoke, bergamot, cedar, root dark vetiver. He lived inside the walls. Mireille took her suitcase without asking and handed it to a younger man who appeared soundlessly from a side corridor. Dinner at 7. She said. He will see you then. You say that like I'm being admitted. A shadow of amusement touched Mireille's mouth. "It is a house," she said. "All houses admit. The question is what they keep." She led Alara upstairs to a bedroom with tall windows overlooking the lavender fields. Whitewashed walls, iron bed, linen coverlet, a writing desk beneath the window. On the chair lay a cream dress, flat sandals, and a folded cardigan, as if someone had anticipated both the temperature and the exact shape of her body. Alara looked at the clothes. Mireille followed her gaze. "For dinner. You knew my size. We guessed well." That was not an answer, and both women knew it. Mireille set a carafe of water on the bedside table. 7. When the door closed, Alara crossed to the window and looked out. Lavender all the way to the line of darker trees. Golden late light moving across the rows. A fountain somewhere below. Unseen but audible. Farther off, the low mechanical hum of something agricultural being shut down for the evening. She should have felt calm. Instead, she felt measured. The dress fit perfectly. At 6:55, she went downstairs. The library door stood open. He was at the window with one hand in his pocket, looking out over the fields as though the land had made an argument and he was considering whether to answer it. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearms, open one button at the throat. No tie, no jacket. Dusk laid bronze along the line of his cheek. The scar climbed from beneath the collar more visibly now, pale against his skin, disappearing under the angle of his jaw. Books rose floor to ceiling across 3 walls. Leather, cloth, old gilt. A decanter and 2 glasses waited on the low table between 2 wingback chairs. He did not turn immediately. "Sit," he said. Not rude, not polite. A word shaped by habit into command. Alara sat. Only then did he face her. Up close, nothing about him softened. If anything, proximity sharpened him. Dark hair, controlled mouth, eyes too clear to be mistaken for warmth. The scar not hidden, not displayed, simply existing as part of the geometry of him. He crossed the room and sat opposite her, poured amber liquor into both glasses, pushed one toward her. "You came," he said. "You made that logistically simple." His mouth shifted faintly. She left the glass untouched. "You still haven't told me your name." "Lucian Martin." The surname landed heavily enough that she felt it more than heard it. Martin. Old money bones. Old world consonants. A name that sounded inherited and dangerous before any evidence confirmed either. "Alara Vale," she said. "Since we're pretending this is normal, that would be inefficient. So what are we pretending? That you came here for work?" She held his gaze. "I did." "No," he said. "You came here because your old life collapsed and I was the only person who offered you a door." The accuracy irritated her more than any insult could have. "And you opened it out of pure generosity?" He picked up his glass, inhaled once, and drank. No, at least he wasn't ornamental about dishonesty. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "To finish something. That could mean anything, for other people maybe." He set down the glass. 6 months. You work here, you use my lab, you rebuild your standing. In return, you help me complete a fragrance. Alara leaned back slightly. "That sounds almost reasonable." "It isn't." There was no smile when he said it. "What's the actual version?" "You stay on the estate unless you have permission to leave. You do not contact Adrian Cross or anyone connected to him. You do not return to New York during the term of our agreement. You work every day. You tell me the truth about what you smell. I pay you enough that money stops degrading your decision-making." That last one almost sounded kind. It wasn't meant to. The open honesty of that should have made him easier to classify. It did not. She looked at the untouched whiskey, then back at him. "Why me?" "Because you can smell what other people miss. A lot of perfumers can. Not like you." He said it flatly, as fact, not flattery. That made it harder to dismiss. She folded her hands to keep them still. "And what is this fragrance supposed to do?" Something changed in his face then. Not much. Less than most people would have noticed. But his attention narrowed by a degree, and the room seemed to move with it. "It is meant," he said, "to guide the body out of pain." Alara stared. "That's not how fragrance works." "Most fragrance," he replied, "is decorative. Most neuroscience isn't magic." His eyes did not leave hers. "I'm not asking for magic. You're asking for a molecule that rewrites grief. I'm asking for a bridge." "To what?" "To safety." The word entered the room and stayed there. Alara looked down at her hands once, then up again. "That still isn't how it works." "What if you're wrong?" She almost laughed. Then she realized he was not being provocative for effect. He was asking the question as a man asks about a door he has been trying to open for years and is willing to destroy the hinges if needed. He rose. The motion was sudden enough that her body went alert before her mind named why. He crossed to a cabinet, withdrew a leather folder, and set it on the table before her. Inside lay pages of formula structures, revisions, ingredient sources, ratios, failures, notes in margins so sharp and compressed they looked carved rather than written. This was not hobbyist obsession. This was 6 years of war against an idea. Alara turned one page, then another. The structure underneath the attempted accords was extraordinary, not commercially extraordinary, intellectually. Someone had built an architecture designed not merely to smell beautiful, but to move through the nervous system in stages, lowering alarm, opening memory, warming attachment pathways, awakening bodily trust. A terrible idea, a brilliant one. Her perfumer's mind leaned forward before the rest of her could object. "This is impossible," she murmured. "Yes." She looked up. "That," Lucian said, "is why you're here." She kept reading. Turkish rose, aged sandalwood. A musk accord developed and abandoned, then rebuilt 3 separate times. Traces of a top note structure she would have called too clean, until she saw what base it was designed to meet. The work was disciplined, ruthless, expensive, and unfinished in the most maddening way possible, close enough to suggest it could be solved, broken enough to resist every elegant fix. "Something's missing," she said. His voice stayed low. "Yes. What? If I knew, you would not be here. Fair." She closed the folder halfway. "And in exchange for solving your impossible grief perfume, I get what? Protection, salary, a room. You get a future no one can strip from you with a signature." The line was too well aimed to ignore. "Still," she said, "that sounds suspiciously like a threat if spoken with enough confidence. Then hear it as leverage." He moved toward the window again. "You were made vulnerable by trust. I have no interest in repeating that mistake with you." "With me or around me?" His head turned slightly. The scar caught the dying light. "You've been trying to read me since New York," he said. Heat flickered under her skin. "I read everyone." "And?" She held his gaze. "And you don't register," she said. Most people would have bristled, or smiled smugly, or pushed back with some smooth line about being unknowable. He did none of those things. "You find that frightening," he said. She wanted to tell him no on reflex, on pride, on principle. Instead, she said, "I find it inconvenient." That almost drew a smile from him. Almost. He looked at her for another second, then moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To give you time." "For what?" "To decide whether you can work for a man you cannot read." He paused at the threshold, one hand on the frame, shoulders relaxed, voice unchanged. "The question is not who I am, Alara. It's who you become if you stay." Then he left her alone in the library with the folder, the untouched whiskey, and the dusk settling over the lavender like a second skin. She did not sleep. That became clear around 2:13 in the morning, when Alara stopped pretending the sound she was listening for in the hallway had a name less embarrassing than his footsteps. The room Mireille had given her was too quiet for city habits. No sirens, no freight elevator rattling in a neighboring building, no couple arguing through drywall. The estate breathed differently, floorboards settling, night air touching the shutters, insects outside running the same dry rhythm through the dark. Somewhere lower in the house, plumbing moved in the walls with a faint old house murmur. On the writing desk lay the contract. 3 pages. Dense, practical, cleanly predatory. 6 months. Compensation generous enough to feel corrective. Ownership terms explicit. All work relating to the project housed on the estate during the term. Any derivative formulas developed independently by her outside the project remained hers, with written documentation required daily and duplicated nightly. Travel restricted. Visitors forbidden without approval. Confidentiality airtight. Security provisions vague in a way that implied they were real. At the bottom of the final page, beneath the legal language and Lucian Martin's decisive signature, one handwritten line had been added. "Your gift deserves a structure stronger than faith." That line annoyed her because it understood exactly what Adrian had exploited. By 3:10, she was sitting at the edge of the bed with the contract in her lap, and the bedside lamp casting a tight circle of yellow over the pages. By 3:18, she signed. Not because she trusted him, because ruin in New York had become passive, and whatever this was, it at least moved. Morning in the dining room felt like an examination staged as breakfast. Lucian was already seated when she entered. Coffee at his elbow, a document open in one hand. Sun angled across the long table and laid pale gold over bread, fruit, cheese, and a small dish of apricot preserves. He wore a white shirt this time, sleeves rolled, collar open. The scar disappeared beneath the cloth. He looked up once when she came in, took in her face, the signed contract in her hand, and returned to the page. "You signed?" he said. "Yes." "Good. No congratulation. No ceremonial satisfaction. Just confirmation, as if weather had arrived on schedule." Ilara set the contract beside his coffee. "You might at least pretend to be pleased. I prefer efficiency to theater. That explains why your house feels like it can hear itself think." His eyes flicked up. "Sit." She sat. Mireille moved in and out of the room with silent authority, filling cups, replacing a knife, adjusting nothing that required adjusting. At one point she set fresh coffee at Ilara's right hand and said, not softly enough to be private, "Eat while he is in a tolerable mood." Lucien did not look up from his document. "Mireille enjoys inventing mythologies." "I invent nothing," she replied, and departed. Ilara almost smiled. Lucien closed the folder in front of him at last. "We start in 10 minutes. "With what?" "A test." "What kind?" "The kind that tells me whether I overestimated you." There it was again, that direct, almost severe confidence that stripped ordinary conversation of cushioning. She bit into bread she did not taste, and followed him downstairs through a side corridor, down a stone stair, and through a door heavy enough to imply both value and fire. The lab was not a room. It was a consecration. High windows, long work tables scrubbed pale with use, copper stills catching the morning light in warm curves, shelves rising floor to ceiling, lined with bottles in amber, cobalt, clear crystal, matte black, drawers labeled in an immaculate hand, scales, pipettes, glass rods, notebooks, blotters, heating plates, extraction apparatus, sealed cabinets. The air itself had layers, citrus ghosting over resins, old cedar, spice, dry green stems, an almost holy trace of aged florals sleeping in glass. Her body recognized abundance before her mind did. Shoulders dropped. Breath shifted. A part of her that had spent the last month cramped around survival opened in one clean motion. "Oh," she said. Lucien set a small wooden case on the table and opened it. 6 vials nestled in black velvet. No labels. "Identify them," he said. "Top note to base. Origin, if you can. You have 1 minute." Ilara looked at him. "That's not a minute test. That's posturing. Then enjoy humiliating it." She reached for the first vial. The instant the stopper came free, the room narrowed into its proper hierarchy. Not him. Not the contract. Not the country. The thing in the glass. Bergamot, yes, but not standard industrial brightness. Calabrian. Winter harvest. Fresh enough to still carry pith edge. Second, Neroli, Tunisian, steam distilled, slightly greener than the Moroccan lots she'd worked with before. Third, Rose de May from Grasse, high quality, but not this year's picking, last season, stored well. Fourth, Jasmine Sambac, India, warm and narcotic, not yet indolic enough to turn dirty. Fifth, real oak moss, restricted, beautiful. Sixth, ambergris tincture, matured so long it had stopped announcing itself and started behaving like gravity. She set down the final vial. 18 seconds, she said. The quiet that followed was not empty. It had weight. Lucien lifted his wrist and looked at his watch, then at her. "Again," he said. She stared. "You timed me?" "Yes." "And?" 18 seconds. "You sound offended." "I sound corrected." That unexpectedly pleased her. He gathered the vials back into their case and closed the lid. Most people in this business confuse exposure with discernment. Most people in this business wear too much perfume to think. His gaze held hers 1 moment longer than necessary. "Useful," he said. "Thank you." "I didn't praise you." "No," she replied. "But you almost developed a pulse." The line slipped out before caution could stop it. His mouth shifted very slightly. Then he crossed to a shelf, selected 3 bottles, and set them between them with measured care. "Your first assignment," he said, "is not to improve my formula. Bold of you to deny me my destiny this early. Your first assignment is to tell me why it fails." He opened the leather notebook to a marked page and turned it toward her. The structure from the night before returned. Only now she could see the progression of attempts more clearly. The formula lifted too cleanly, then warmed, then tried to sink its roots into something beneath ordinary sensuality. Trust, perhaps, or surrender. or relief so complete the body forgot to brace. Alara uncapped the first trial accord and touched one drop to a blotter, waited, inhaled, then another, then directly on skin. The hours disappeared. Lucian worked near her without intruding, sometimes selecting an essence before she asked, sometimes standing entirely still behind her shoulder while she wrote, his silence more exacting than commentary. Once he corrected a ratio she had just begun to suspect was wrong. Once he handed her a fresh strip at the exact second she needed one, and she hated the efficiency because it implied attention. At midday, Mireille arrived with bread, pears, and cold roast chicken on a tray. She took one look at the work table and said, "Good. Something in this house finally smells like effort." Lucien did not glance up. "Mireille." "What?" she said. "If I flatter her too much, you'll both become unbearable." After she left, Alara found herself smiling into the mouth of a rose bottle. She stopped immediately when she realized he had noticed. By late afternoon, she had 3 pages of notes and one strong conclusion. "This formula doesn't fail because it's weak," she said. Lucian set down the pipette in his hand. "Go on." "It fails because it tries to control the transition too precisely." She tapped the page. "You're asking scent to shepherd a body from alarm to attachment without allowing enough space for disruption. It's too managed, too intelligent. That is not usually a criticism. It is when you're trying to reach something primal." He leaned one hip against the table, arms folding. Alara kept going because she knew she had him now. Not emotionally, never that, but intellectually, which might be the nearest available currency. "You've built a formula that lowers defenses beautifully," she said, "but it doesn't invite. It directs. The body knows the difference. And what does the body require? Risk." His face did not change, but the room did. A subtle tension, not anger. Recognition held still. "Define that," he said. "Uncertainty." She moved to the notebook, flipping back 2 pages. "Every successful emotional perfume has some small instability in it, a point the wearer has to cross without full control. Not mess, not sloppiness, exposure." He said nothing. She looked up. "You hate that answer." "I'm considering whether it's true." "It's true. And if it is, then you can't engineer comfort without touching whatever makes comfort necessary in the first place." Silence stretched. Lucian pushed away from the table and walked toward the far shelves. His steps were slow, deliberate. When he reached the cabinet, he withdrew a single bottle from the upper row and held it without uncapping it. "The top shelf is not to be touched without me present," he said. Alara followed his gaze. "Amber bottles, darker glass, older liquid, no labels visible from here. Because they're rare, because they cannot be replaced." The words were flat, but his hand on the bottle had tightened slightly. She filed that away. The next 5 days developed a rhythm so controlled it almost became intimate. Breakfast at 7, mostly in silence. Work by 8. Lunch in the lab, never in the dining room. Mireille appearing and disappearing like a disapproving saint. Evenings alone. The estate taught her its sounds. The fountain on the east side cut off at dusk. Shutters closed in a staggered pattern as the staff moved through the house. A dog barked at some distant farm each night around 10 and was answered, always, by another farther off. The west wing remained closed. On the second morning, she tried conversation over coffee. "How old is the house?" Lucian spread marmalade on toast without looking at her. "Old enough? That tells me almost nothing. It tells you what matters. The answer is no. The answer is sufficient." On the third morning, she asked whether he ever left the estate. "Yes." "For pleasure or business?" "Yes." "Do you enjoy making language useless?" He looked up then, eyes clear over the rim of his cup. "Do you enjoy trying to turn it into a key?" The line should have ended the exchange. Instead, it followed her into the lab and sat quietly somewhere behind her concentration all morning. What unsettled her was not simply that she could not read him. It was that he seemed able to read the direction of her attention without betraying his own. In the lab he changed, not softened, sharpened differently. He became precise in motion, economical with his hands, exact in criticism. He stood close when discussing structures, close enough that she could feel his body heat at her shoulder and catch the rawer edge of him beneath the vetiver and bergamot, a warmer note, darker than cedar, something like skin after sun and old smoke in fabric. She still could not smell fear, desire, resentment, boredom, guilt, any of the ordinary betrayals. Yet he was not empty. He was blocked. That distinction irritated her more than the first hypothesis had. On the 5th day, he reached across her to open a drawer she had not noticed hidden under the lip of the table. His sleeve brushed her arm. Such a small contact. Barely there. Her body reacted before her mind could classify it. Heat moved over her skin in a quick, humiliating wave. She stepped back so abruptly her hip struck the table edge. Lucien withdrew the drawer fully, retrieved a folder, and straightened. His gaze moved once to the place her body had retreated, then to her face. "Problem?" he asked. "No." "Good." He walked away. The folder remained in his hand. Her pulse did not return to normal for several minutes. That evening, she took her tea outside and walked the lavender rows until the sky emptied from gold to blue to charcoal. Crickets started. The last heat lifted off the fields in slow ribbons. She trailed her fingers over the flowering tops and let the scent settle her enough to think cleanly. This is a job, she told herself. A brilliant one. A strange one. A dangerously resourced one. But a job. The problem was not him. The problem was proximity after deprivation. A body mistaking intensity for meaning because the last man who had touched her had done so with theft in his hands. Lucien's attention in the lab felt clean by comparison. Clean did not mean safe. It meant unfamiliar. When she returned to the house, Mireille was waiting in the corridor with a candle and an expression that suggested she had been deciding whether to interfere. "You should not wander too far at night," Mireille said. "I was in the fields. I know where you were." Ilara leaned against the wall. Was that concern? It was instruction. Mireille adjusted the candle on its brass tray. "The west wing is private. I haven't gone near it." "Good." Her gaze sharpened. Curiosity is costly in houses where men have built entire floors out of memory. That line would have sounded melodramatic from anyone else. From Mireille, it sounded logistical. "Does he own memory on schedule too?" Ilara asked. Mireille looked at her for a moment, then said, "He owns nothing on that subject. That is his problem." Before Ilara could answer, Mireille turned and went downstairs. The next morning, Lucien was late for the first time. Not by much. 40 minutes. Enough to register. Ilara was already in the lab reviewing her notes when she heard his voice from the library at the end of the corridor. French. Fast. Low. She understood only fragments, but tone required no translation. Not loud. Worse. Controlled in the way men became when every word had already been sharpened before it left the mouth. A response came through the speakerphone. Tinny and male. Lucien said one final sentence in French. Short, edged, final. Then silence. He entered the lab 10 minutes later. Something in him had changed. Not externally. Shirt immaculate. Face composed. Hands steady. But the air around him held a pressure she had not felt before, as if some interior lock had been tested too hard. He came to her station, lifted the strip she had just worked, and read the formula at a glance. "This ratio is wrong," he said. "It isn't. It is on skin. You haven't tested it." He looked at her then. Really looked. "No," he said quietly. "You haven't." Before she could answer, he uncapped the trial accord, stepped behind her shoulder, and with his free hand moved her hair aside. The first touch was not even skin. Fingers through hair. A brief, controlled sweep that exposed the side of her neck. Still, everything under her skin tightened. "What are you doing?" she asked, and disliked the thinness that had entered her voice. "Testing." His fingertip came to the place just below her ear. Cool liquid. 1 drop, maybe 2. She inhaled sharply. The formula bloomed almost instantly on warmth. Bergamot first, brighter than on blotter. Then neroli unfolding too quickly. Jasmine rising under it with a living, headier quality skin always gave it. Lucien's hand remained lightly at the back of her neck for 1 second longer than necessary while they both waited. He bent his head. Not touching. Only close enough that his breath moved the fine hairs just beneath her ear. The room narrowed to one impossible point. "Top notes are opening too fast," he murmured. His voice landed against her skin. Ilara gripped the edge of the table. "I know. No. Still close. Still not touching. You suspected." Then he inhaled. Not greedily. Not theatrically. Professionally. That should have made it easier to bear. It did not. "Bergamot," he said. "Neroli. Jasmine too warm. There." His thumb settled lightly against the base of her throat, just enough to mark the place. Something else. "Your skin is pulling the musk upward." Her pulse struck against the pad of his thumb. "That shouldn't happen yet," she said. "It is. Maybe because I'm standing here with my employer breathing on my neck." The line was half shield, half truth. His thumb did not move. "Maybe," he said. Then he withdrew at once. crossing to the opposite side of the table and putting 6 feet and polished wood between them in a single clean retreat. "That," he said, voice controlled again, "is useful. Useful." Ilara stared at him. The place on her neck where his hand had been felt overexposed to air. He capped the bottle, wrote one short note in the margin of her page and said, "Enough, we stop for today." Then he left. No apology, no explanation. No acknowledgement that the room had changed shape while his head was bent beside hers. Ilara stayed exactly where she was, one hand still on the table, waiting for the furious clarity she should have had. Instead, what came first was a terrible, electric curiosity. Later that night, after dinner without him and a walk cut short by wind rising over the fields, she woke from a dream already moving. She did not know she was dreaming until the stone under her bare feet felt colder than it should have. Her mother's voice was somewhere ahead of her, not clear words, urgency shaped like her name. Ilara moved down a dark corridor in her nightdress with one hand skimming the wall. The estate around her had gone unreal in the way only sleeping bodies could manage. Doorframes slightly too far apart, air too thin, shadows carrying the wrong depth. At the end of the hall, a door stood open to night. She stepped through it. Terrace, wind, iron railing. 3 stories down, the courtyard slept in pale moonlight. The voice called again. She climbed over the railing, then hands closed around her waist so hard the world snapped. She gasped and jerked backward, heel skidding on stone, body pulled violently into a wall of heat and muscle. For one blind second she thought she was falling the wrong way. Then an arm locked across her ribs, another under her knees, and a voice, close, rough, stripped of every polished edge, said directly into her ear, "Ilara, wake up." Her eyes opened. The terrace, the drop, her own body half over the ledge, Lucian holding her against him with enough force to bruise. She blinked once, twice, unable to map dream onto reality quickly enough. "What? You were sleepwalking." His breathing was hard, not winded, shocked. I know." He tightened his grip when she shifted. "You climbed the railing." The night rushed in all at once, cold on her bare arms, lavender below, iron under one dangling foot, Lucian's heartbeat striking against her back with alarming force. He moved then, lifting her fully, one arm behind her knees, one at her back, carrying her inside as if the choice had already been made elsewhere, and long before this moment. Ilara's hands found his shoulders on instinct. His shirt was not buttoned fully. Her fingers slid once, accidentally, against the scar at the base of his throat, where skin changed texture under her touch. He went absolutely still for half a step, then kept moving. The corridor lamps were low. His scent filled the air around them, soap, smoke, bergamot, vetiver, and under it the warm, live note she had only caught in fragments before, the one that made her body respond before logic arrived. She should have pulled away. Instead, half awake and shaking, she stayed where he held her, cheek against his chest, listening to the brutal rhythm of his heart. When they reached her room, he set her on the bed with startling care, drew the blankets over her legs and stepped back. Only then did she realize he was staying. He crossed to the chair beside the window and sat down in the dark. "You don't need to," she began. "Yes," he said. The word ended it. Ilara should have argued, should have insisted on privacy, on boundaries, on anything that would restore the proper architecture of employer, employee, impossible host, dangerous stranger. Instead, she was still shaking. She lay back against the pillow and watched his silhouette in the chair until her eyes grew heavy again. The moon gave him edges, but not expression. One hand rested against the armrest. The other was braced over his mouth as if he did not trust it. Just before sleep took her a second time, she heard herself say, small and unguarded as a child, "Don't let me fall." The silence after that was not empty. Then his voice came out of the dark, lower than she had ever heard it. "I won't." She woke to a note. "Business in Arles. 2 weeks. Continue the work. L." No apology for leaving before dawn. No mention of the terrace. No acknowledgement that he had carried her half asleep through his house with his pulse hammering against her cheek. The chair by the window sat empty and innocent in the morning light. Ilara read the note twice, folded it once, and set it beside the water glass. Then she got angry. Not because he had gone, because he had turned what felt dangerously close to intimacy into instruction before sunrise. That anger proved useful. For the first 3 days of his absence, she worked like a person punishing silence. She catalogued every shelf he had allowed her access to, cross-referenced his failed accords with her own notes, rebuilt the musk problem from the foundation upward, and filled a black notebook with observations about the formula's collapse points. Mireille found her at midnight in the lab on the second night and said, "You may take this as praise. You already look like you belong here in the worst possible way." Alara did not look up from the blotters spread in front of her. "Is that because I'm working, or because I've become difficult? In this house, those are usually the same thing." Jules, the younger man who handled luggage, deliveries, and apparently anything else requiring quiet competence, drove her into town twice. Grass with stone alleys, shutters, cafes under awnings, women carrying bread like inheritance, and perfumery so old the counters looked polished by generations of wrists. In the market, she bought citrus, notebooks, and a silk scarf she did not need. At a tiny cafe on the square, she sat with black coffee and listened to local gossip swirl around Lucien's surname without ever settling into anything useful. Martin opened doors in town, not loudly, completely. At the end of the first week, Mireille took her to visit an elderly perfumer named Madame Rousseau, whose workshop sat behind a courtyard overgrown with rosemary. The old woman smelled of iris root, dust, and rose water. Her hands were marked by decades of extraction and solvent. She listened to Alara describe a problem in structure, then said, "You work with Lucien Martin?" It was not a question. "Yes." Madame Rousseau measured her for a moment with bright, unsettling eyes. "Then either he has changed, or you have become relevant. Which is worse? For you?" The old woman smiled without softness. "Unclear." She handed Alara a vial of rose absolute so pure it seemed to carry weather inside it. "For when you stop trying to outthink the formula," Madame Rousseau said, "men like him build prisons out of precision. Scent needs one broken window." That sentence stayed with her all the way back to the estate. So did the other thing Madame Rousseau had said, almost casually, while wrapping the vial in tissue. He has always worked alone. Not now. The implication of exception worked through Alara more deeply than she wanted to admit. By the 12th day of his absence, she knew where the afternoon sun hit her room first, knew which stair gave under weight and which held firm, knew Mireille muttered at bread dough in Provençal when it disappointed her, knew the west wing stayed locked even when the rest of the house breathed open. She also knew she was waiting. Not passively, not romantically. She refused both words. But the fact remained that every morning, some part of her body listened for a different step in the corridor. On the 15th morning, she walked into the lab and stopped at once. Lucien stood at the work table with travel dust still on his boots and 2 wooden crates at his side. His shirt sleeves were rolled carelessly, not neatly as before. There was fatigue at the edges of his face and a small nick at one knuckle. The sight of him after absence registered physically, like stepping from shade into sudden light. He looked up. His gaze moved over her once, swift and comprehensive, taking in the braid over one shoulder, the ink on her fingers, the absence of surprise she was trying unsuccessfully to perform. "You continued," he said. "Every day. Good." He opened one crate. Inside, wrapped in cloth and moss, lay materials she recognized only in fragments: dark resin, silver-green leaves, sealed jars of tincture, and one bottle whose stopper he did not remove, but whose mere presence altered the air with promise. "Oud," he said, 30 years aged, private collector outside Dubai. Alara looked at the bottle, then at him. "You left me alone with an impossible formula and came back carrying a kingdom." He set the oud on the table between them. "Will it help?" "Yes." Then the trip was justified. No mention of the terrace, none of the note, none of the way she had asked him not to let her fall, and he had answered from the dark like a vow he regretted hearing himself make. She should have been grateful for the clean boundary. Instead, she found it infuriating. The next days moved under a strange current. They worked harder than before and spoke less, yet the silences had changed texture. Not easier, more charged. When their hands brushed, reaching for the same bottle, both noticed. When he stood behind her to read a page, she felt it before he arrived. Once, late in the afternoon, he passed a strip near enough to her mouth that his knuckles grazed her lower lip by accident. Neither commented. She tasted paper, skin, and the single shocked second his restraint nearly showed on his face. Then came the afternoon with the yellow dress. The day had started hot and stayed that way. Even the stone walls of the lab seemed to hold warmth more than they released it. Lucien disappeared after lunch to inspect the new materials with Jules, leaving Alara alone at the central table with 3 failed revisions, and the eau de corde finally beginning to speak the right language to the base. By 4, her mind was overworked and useless. She put down her pen, climbed onto the edge of the broad wooden work table, and lay back flat against the grain. The dress she had chosen that morning was pale yellow linen, practical until it wasn't. The slit that allowed easy movement now fell open over one thigh. The air from the high windows moved over her skin in a slow, lazy current, carrying lavender from the fields and traces of old resins from the shelves. She closed her eyes. This had always been her reset. Strip thinking out. Let scent reorganize what intellect had tangled. Breath in. Lavender. Dust warmed by sun. The sharp medicinal ghost of ethanol from an uncapped jar across the room. The animal sweetness of old oud not yet integrated. The starch-clean linen over her own skin. The faint mineral note of stone after heat. Then another shift. Not smell first. Density. She opened her eyes halfway and saw nothing because she was angled toward the ceiling. But she knew someone had entered. Knew before his footstep finally gave itself away on the board nearest the door. "Don't move," Lucian said. The words were low enough to feel private. Ilara should have sat up immediately. Instead, she stayed where she was, one hand loose at her side, pulse picking up. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Testing." That answer is becoming a problem. He came to stand beside the table. She could not see him fully without turning her head, and that fact alone altered the geometry. She felt his attention moving over her, the exposed throat, the line of her dress against her ribs, the bare leg where the slit had fallen open. Not hungrily. That would have been simpler, more dangerously, as if he were looking at something he had promised himself not to touch and was now counting the cost of the promise. A stopper clicked. The formula opened in the air, not the current trial, a revised one. Cistus, oud, clary sage. Jasmine folded deeper into the architecture now, less floral than bodily. The thing had become darker, more persuasive. His fingers closed lightly around her wrist. Cool glass touched skin first. Then one slow line of fragrance painted from the inside of her wrist to the crease of her elbow. He did the same to the other arm. "Focus," he said. "Tell me what changes." Ilara inhaled. "Cistus," she murmured. "Oud. Sage. Something greener than before." "Good." His hand moved to her ankle. The contact was light enough to be deniable, and final enough not to be. Every nerve in her body woke at once. He traced the fragrance there too, along the inside of her ankle, then the line of her calf, deliberate and exact, as if mapping a route no one had permitted him to take. "The composition responds to heat," he said, voice rougher than she had heard in the lab before. "Blood chemistry, skin conductivity, adrenal shift. You sound very calm for a man explaining something with his hand halfway up my leg." "Do I?" His fingertips paused just below her knee. Ilara's mouth went dry. "The jasmine is thickening," she said, because the alternative was admitting she could barely think. "The oud is changing?" he prompted. "Yes." "Into what?" She tried to answer honestly. Into something less like perfume than consequence. His hand moved higher, not to indecency, to danger. The inner line of her thigh where the dress had opened and the body understood proximity before language. Ilara's back arched off the table involuntarily. "Stay with the scent," he said. She almost laughed at the cruelty of the instruction. "How?" she asked softly. "When the experiment is sabotaging the instrument." His face entered her field of vision then as he leaned over her. No smile. Eyes darker than usual. A pulse moving hard in his throat. The scar pale against sun-browned skin. "The instrument," he said, "is telling the truth." That sentence entered her like heat. She inhaled again and reached, as instinctively as she had reached for every person her whole life, beyond the fragrance and into the chemistry of the man holding the line between restraint and collapse directly above her. Still nothing clear. Still that impossible sealed chamber. But not nothing exactly. Something buried so deep it barely surfaced. A dark, old, smoke-soaked thing adjacent to grief and not yet willing to call itself by name. Her eyes opened fully. Lucian was closer now, one hand braced on the table beside her shoulder, the other still resting against the inside of her thigh with such brutal restraint that the lack of movement became its own form of pressure. "The formula," he said quietly, "amplifies arousal." "I know." "Do you?" "Yes." Her voice came out breathless and wrecked. "I can smell it." For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Then he stepped back as if yanked by a wire under the skin. His hand left her. The absence hit harder than the contact had. "That is enough for today," he said. He turned and walked out of the lab with controlled speed, leaving the scent on her skin, the room full of altered air, and no explanation at all for why she already knew she would think about that moment all night. She did. Sleep refused her. By midnight, the sheets had become an accusation. By 1, she had gotten up, crossed to the wash basin, and scrubbed the trial cord from her wrists, arms, ankle, throat, as if chemistry were all she needed to remove. At 1:30, she saw a light beneath the door at the end of the west wing. Curiosity should have felt cheap. Instead, it felt earned. She crossed the corridor barefoot, one hand tucked into the belt of her robe, and reached his door just as water shut off somewhere inside. The door was not fully latched. Steam drifted through the gap. Ilara should have turned back. She did not. Through the narrow opening, she saw his reflection first in the bathroom mirror. Bareback, dark hair dampened at the neck, shoulders broad under a sheen of water. He reached for the hem of his black shirt and pulled it over his head in one motion. The scar revealed itself all at once, not only the line on his neck. It spread over his right shoulder in pale, textured ribbons, crossed the collarbone, and disappeared lower beneath the line of the towel hanging at his waist. Not neat, not cinematic. The mapped aftermath of real heat, real damage, the body's hard, imperfect answer to survival. Ilara forgot to breathe. Then he looked up. Their eyes met in the mirror. For 3 heartbeats, neither moved. Lucian turned. He took one towel from the rack, wrapped it low around his hips, and crossed the room toward the door with the same measured pace he used everywhere, which somehow made the moment worse, more intentional, more impossible to dismiss as accident. He opened the door fully. Ilara stepped back at once until the corridor wall touched her spine. Steam and soap rolled out around him. He stood in the doorway barefoot, skin still wet, the scar unhidden now in the hall light. His chest rose and fell once, deeper than usual. "Were you watching me?" he asked. The question was quiet enough to be far more dangerous than anger. "It was an accident," she said. "No, just that. No smile, no cruelty, no rescue either. You were watching." Heat climbed her throat so fast it hurt. He stepped closer, not touching, not yet. One hand came up and caught her wrist. His thumb settled over her pulse. It was racing. They both knew it. "Just like this afternoon," he said. His head dipped. Not to kiss. To breathe her in at the side of the neck the way he had in the lab. Only now there was no formula between them. No trial, no notebook, no professional disguise. Ilara felt the exact instant his control slipped. Not visibly, but in the sound that left him, low and involuntary, when he drew in the scent of her skin. His hand planted against the wall beside her head. She was caged by heat, steam, stone, and the brutal fact of him bare inches away. No cologne, no bergamot, no curated distance. Just soap, skin, warmth, and that darker live note under everything that she had only ever caught in fragments. Their mouths were close enough that one movement would erase the last surviving line. His eyes dropped once to her mouth and stayed there a fraction too long. Ilara looked down despite herself, at the scar crossing his chest, at the rigid set of his abdomen. Lower for one disloyal second, enough to see what the towel concealed poorly and his body was no longer helping him deny. She snapped her gaze back to his face. Something in his expression had gone raw. One hand rose, hovered near her jaw, waiting not for permission exactly, but for the thing just before it, the last possible exit. Ilara put her palm against his chest. The skin there was hot, the scar rough in places, smooth in others. His heart slammed under her hand with astonishing force. She pushed. Not hard. Enough. Then she ran. Her feet hit the corridor stones hard and fast. She did not look back. She reached her room, shut the door, and braced herself against it, breathing in broken pieces while the imprint of his skin stayed in her hand like heat after fire. Down the hall, faint through stone and distance, she heard one violent impact. A fist against wall, perhaps. Then silence. Morning came too cleanly. Sun on the window, white linen, birdsong outside. A body that remembered too much. When Ilara reached the breakfast terrace, Lucien was gone. Mireille set coffee before her and said nothing until the second cup. Then, very dryly, "Some men leave early because they are busy. Some leave early because they are cowards. The wise woman does not waste energy sorting which is which before she has eaten." Ilara looked up. "Did he ask you to say that?" "He would rather set himself on fire than ask me to say anything useful." By noon, Jules had driven her and Lucien to Marseille for a flight. "I thought we were working." Ilara said as the car pulled through the estate gates. We are, Lucienne replied from beside her in the rear seat. Then why are we going to the airport? Because there are materials in Istanbul I can't source here. Istanbul. Yes. Is there any reason you only deliver information once movement makes objection pointless? That tends to improve efficiency. She turned to the window so he would not see the involuntary smile that almost answered. He saw it anyway. By the time the private jet leveled over the Mediterranean, the silence between them had become too loaded to remain empty. Ilara broke first. You disappeared after last night. Lucienne did not turn from the view. I had business. Of course. A beat. Then he said, You ran. She looked at him. Yes. Reasonably. That almost sounded like an apology. It was an observation. The plane engine filled the pause. Below them, clouds moved in white architecture over blue. Ilara folded her hands in her lap. You don't get to corner me, say nothing, disappear, and then return to logistics as if none of it happened. Lucian finally turned. I know. The answer was so unadorned it silenced her for a second. He looked back to the window. I am not practiced at wanting things that complicate the structure. That sounded alarmingly close to honesty. You should not encourage it. I'm beginning to think your honesty would require international supervision. That did it. The corner of his mouth moved. Not enough to count as a smile. Enough to make the cabin feel smaller. Istanbul arrived in heat, traffic, sea air, exhaust, spice, and history layered so densely the city smelled built rather than grown. Minarets lifted over the skyline. Water flashed between buildings. The Bosphorus cut silver under late light. Ilara sat forward in the car despite herself, watching streets narrow, widen, crowd, open again. Lucian got out first when the sedan stopped near the Grand Bazaar and offered her his hand. Stay close, he said. His fingers closed around hers when she took it. That should not have mattered. It did. The bazaar swallowed them whole. Vaulted ceilings, hanging lamps, carpets, leather, gold, coffee, perfume, tourists moving badly, merchants moving beautifully, the entire place alive with bargaining and observation. Lucian led her through it with quiet certainty, never once hesitating at a turn. The crowd pressed. His grip on her hand tightened just enough to guide, never enough to drag. They stopped outside a narrow spice shop whose front room held saffron, sumac, cinnamon bark, dried citrus, and glass jars full of things she could not name. A young man behind the counter looked up, saw Lucienne, and immediately pulled back the curtain at the rear. The room beyond was another world. Clean lines, leather chairs, cool air, shelves of sealed materials arranged with obsessive care. Behind a desk sat a woman who stood when they entered, and the entire temperature of the room shifted. Dark hair to mid-back, black dress cut low without apology, red mouth, olive skin, eyes that assessed Ilara once and dismissed nothing. Lucian, she said, smiling as if his return had been both expected and privately memorable. She came around the desk, kissed his cheek, and let her fingers trail down the center of his chest before she turned toward Ilara. This time, she said, you brought someone. Lucian's hand settled at the small of Ilara's back, warm, steady, possessive enough to register. My business partner, he said. The woman's smile did not change. How serious. Esma, Lucian said, by way of introduction. Ilara. Esma gestured them into chairs and prepared Turkish coffee herself with fluid competence, her body moving through the ritual like music she had performed often. Every time she spoke to Lucian, her tone dropped half a note lower than necessary. Every time she looked at Ilara, the smile stayed while the eyes sharpened. The negotiation that followed was conducted partly in English, partly in Turkish, and almost entirely through implication. Rare black amber resin, saffron threads, a figure Lucian deemed excessive, a revised figure Esma deemed insulting. Ilara said little, but watched everything, watched the old familiarity between them, watched how Lucian's face changed in this city, still controlled, but less austere, as if some earlier version of him had once moved here comfortably and not entirely alone. Then the back door opened and a man walked in hard enough to alter the air. Broad shoulders, dark suit, graying at the temples. He stopped when he saw Lucian, and whatever he had come to say first vanished. Esma, he said in Turkish. She answered sharply. The man ignored her and looked directly at Lucian. You are Martin. The name landed like a blade set gently on a table. Lucian stood. Ilara rose a beat later, every instinct in her body alert. I know what your family does, the man said. His English was excellent. His right hand rested too near the line of his jacket. Gun, Ilara thought instantly, not because she saw it fully, but because the geometry of threat was universal. Lucian's voice turned colder than she had yet heard it. I do not work with them. Once a Martin, always a Martin. Esma snapped something at the man, her brother clearly. He did not take his eyes off Lucian. Whatever you came for, he said, take it elsewhere. Lucian reached into his jacket, removed an envelope and set it on Esma's desk. The resin, the saffron, 4 seasons, tonight. Then he took Ilara's hand and moved her toward the curtain. The brothers stepped in front of them. Lucian stopped. He did not raise his voice, did not posture, did not widen his stance or square his shoulders. He simply looked at the man and said, move. The single word had enough steel in it that the man shifted before his pride caught up. They walked out through the spice shop, through the corridor, into the press of the bazaar. 20 paces later, Ilara pulled her hand free. What did he mean? Lucian kept moving. Not here. She stopped dead. Crowds split around them. Then where? He looked back at her. For one instant the bazaar disappeared, and she saw something in him she had been denied for weeks. Not fear exactly, but the shape left by an old wound when a familiar knife reappears. Tonight, he said. That answer was a fuse, not a resolution. Ilara went with him anyway. The hotel was an Ottoman palace turned luxury fortress. All white stone, dark wood, water view, and staff trained to make wealth feel like weather. The suite overlooked the Bosphorus. Boats cut silver lines through blue-gray water. From the balcony she could smell salt, diesel, flowering trees hidden somewhere below, and the city's immense unquiet breathing at the edges of everything. She should have been thinking about the gun under the brother's jacket. Instead, she was thinking about Martin, about Esma's hand on Lucian's chest, about the way the room in the bazaar had gone still when the surname was spoken. Lucian knocked once at her door near dusk. Tonight, he said, we attend a private event. What kind of event? One where questions are watched more closely than answers. That sounds deeply promising. Traditional dress required. It will arrive in 10 minutes. You continue to plan my life with alarming confidence. His gaze moved over her once, measured and unreadable. I'm usually correct. The box that arrived contained crimson silk and gold embroidery. Bold, exposed, impossible to mistake for modesty. Crop top, low skirt, sheer panels, clothing designed to turn entrance into event. Ilara stood with it in her hands and said aloud to the empty room, absolutely not. Then she put it on. When she opened the door, Lucian stopped moving. For one unguarded second, the entire clean machinery of his restraint showed its strain. The look crossed his face fast. Hunger, yes, but not only that. Recognition. As if some version of her had existed in his mind before she stepped into view, and now reality had made the idea expensive. You've been hiding, he said quietly. Heat climbed her neck. That's a rude thing to say to a woman in someone else's silk. It's an accurate thing. He wore white linen and dark trousers, open at the throat, the scar visible where the collar fell away. Bronze skin against white cloth, damage and beauty in the same frame, refusing to ask permission of each other. The car ride to the palace ran close and silent except for the city outside. At one point, Ilara said, because the thought had become unbearable if left untouched, the woman in the bazaar, Esma. Yes. Do I get a file? No. That's convenient. She is a contact. Only a contact. His head turned. You sound territorial. You sound pleased. He looked out the window again. That, he said after a beat, is inconveniently possible. The palace on the Bosphorus opened in light, music, and silk. Low tables, hanging lamps, servers carrying trays of reiki and lamb, guests in traditional dress, all of them wealthy enough to wear history-like costume and still believe it belonged to them. Musicians played somewhere beyond the courtyard arches. Dancers moved under candlelight with the slow confidence of people certain everyone was watching. Ilara felt underdressed and overexposed at once. Lucian's hand found the small of her back and remained there as they entered. Possessive, protective, impossible to separate. They were seated with a cluster of men Lucian seemed to know in 3 languages. He shifted between English, French, and Turkish with unnerving ease. Ilara watched his mouth shape unfamiliar words. Watched him smile once, not broadly, but enough to show he had once possessed versions of himself not built entirely for cold control. She reached into her purse for a tiny sample vial she had slipped there before leaving the suite. What are you doing? Lucian murmured as she uncapped it. Testing. He looked at her once, sharply, with immediate understanding. That should have stopped her. It did not. She touched one drop to her fingertip and brushed it against the side of his throat where the pulse beat under skin. Lucien went still. A bad idea, he said. Maybe. Not maybe. Then we'll learn fast. The air between them changed almost at once. They both knew it. They both pretended not to. Dinner arrived. Conversation continued. Somewhere music thickened. Alara tried to focus on the meal, on the architecture, on the city opening black and jeweled beyond the terrace. Instead, she became acutely aware of every small contact. His knee near hers beneath the table, his hand at her back when a server passed too close, the scent on his skin darkening with warmth, need built by degrees. Not innocent, not yet acted upon. Worse in some ways. She excused herself and stepped onto the terrace for air. Below, the Bosphorus moved black and silver under the lights. Wind lifted the sheer edge of her sleeve. She pressed both hands to the stone railing and let the night cool her face. Behind her, a male voice said, "So you're the girl." Alara turned. The man from the bazaar, only now she could see him clearly. Mid-30s, strong build, fairer than Lucien, with dark blonde hair and eyes that smiled before the mouth did. Attractive in the dangerous way men became when taught early that charm opened the door and force closed it. He knew her name before she offered it. That alone tightened something under her ribs. "And you are?" she asked. "Matteo Martin," he said. Martin. Not the first time tonight the name had been given weight. He stepped closer, head tilting as if listening to a frequency other people missed. "Interesting," he murmured. "That perfume. Is it yours?" Before she could move, he leaned in slightly at the side of her neck, not touching, but close enough to violate. Smoke and vetiver hit the air a second before Lucien did. "Matteo." The word came out like a locked blade. Lucien appeared at Alara's side and slid one hand around her waist, drawing her back half a step behind the line of his body. The possessive ease of the motion said this had happened before, perhaps often, with men who required instruction. Matteo's smile sharpened. "Brother, brother." The word struck clean and hard. Alara felt it physically. Lucien's hand tightened once at her waist. "We are leaving," he said. "No hello? No reunion? That hurts. Try to survive it." Matteo laughed softly. "You brought her into this city. That was unwise." Every nerve in Alara's body went alert. Lucien did not answer. He moved her off the terrace, through the crowd, toward the entrance. Outside, at the curb, a drunk man staggered too close and reached for Alara's bare arm. Lucien caught his wrist in one motion. "Don't touch her," he said. Not loud. The man went pale and retreated at once. The car arrived. Lucien opened the door. She got in. He followed. The city moved around them in reflected light and silence for 3 full blocks before Alara spoke. "Your brother," she said. "Yes." "Your family." A pause. "Yes." What kind of family makes armed men in spice shops go stiff at a surname? The shadow of a smile touched his mouth without warmth. "The kind you should not ask about in moving vehicles. Then answer when we stop." He looked at her. The perfume on his throat had changed now, deepened by skin and heat into something more dangerous than she had intended when she touched it there. "Tonight," he said again, as if the word were a debt he meant to pay. The suite door closed behind them. Silence. City lights on the Bosphorus. The pulse in her throat. The altered scent in the room. Lucien set his keys on the console and turned toward her. And before either of them spoke, Alara knew, with the terrible certainty of instinct catching up to story, that whatever answer came next would ruin the shape of the night.